How did I get here? Why did I end up being the one having 3 abortions and not my cousin Lynn, who got married, has 3 kids, 2 grandchildren? Why did I get caught up in a painful cycle of sexual sin, shame, and guilt? There are reasons why we find ourselves in the same places of hurt and struggle over and over. Of course, there's obvious reasons that point to my behavior and choices, but I wanted to understand what was behind them. Was it only that I'm a bad person? My healing journey involved digging into my past, and I discovered that there are connections between my destructive behavior and choices and childhood pain and trauma. When I finally identified some of the root causes, I realized I was believing lies about myself that limited the quality of my life and hurt other people. But guess what? I learned that change is possible and life can be different. To help us unpack some of these root causes of our worst behaviors and choices, let me introduce Karin Barbito, the co-author of Unraveled Roots, Exposing the Hidden Causes of Damaging Behaviors.
Thank you, Jane. I'm so glad to be here. Every time I hear somebody say my name and co-author in the same sentence, it still like stops me in my tracks because I never, ever thought I would be part of writing a book. But I'm the poster child for the book. I didn't even realize until we started writing it that there was such a thing as roots. I didn't understand why my life took the course that it did, but I found out, just like you, I believed lies about myself, that I was not loved, that I was unworthy, that I was never going to fit in, that I was forgotten, invisible, and all of that insecurity drove me to try to disprove that lie that I believed about myself. So I did really unhealthy behavior, just like you.
Yeah. Well, we can certainly relate to one another. And, I was wondering if you could kind of help us with, my goal wasn't to have 3 abortions and to be trapped into the cycle of, guilt and shame and hiding and condemnation. And so I want to dig right in to the question you pose at the beginning of the book. Why am I here?
Yeah, such a great question. I can use my own story to tell you how I got to where I was. Um, I started having sex really early just because I wanted to fit in. And it seemed like every time after I had sex, I would be almost like holding my breath, waiting for my cycle to start. And when it was late, I would be like in a panic. And I did that over and over and over and over again, putting myself in that same situation. And then finally, the worst actually happened. I got pregnant. And now I found myself in the situation to make the only decision that I knew I could make, to have an abortion. So I had my abortion at 18. I became really promiscuous afterwards, again, because I was so insecure and lacked confidence, because I believed I was not good enough. I believed I was an outsider, that I didn't fit in. And so I appeared overly confident for the most part, just so people wouldn't know how afraid and lonely I really was. And as I aged, that just morphed into me becoming a raging codependent, which took me down a road of addiction and actually criminal activity.
Yeah. And those weren't ever dreams or plans that you had for your life, right?
I never woke up one day and said, I want to be a drug addict. I never said, I want to go to jail or do any of those things like that. No, I didn't. And, it wasn't until we were writing this book that we, all 3 of the authors, really got in touch with their own roots and why they did the crazy things that they did that they never wanted to do.
Yeah.
It's
And
transformative. The book is transformative. It will change people's lives.
it absolutely is. And I want to put it up right here for us that this is the book that we're talking about, and we're going to dive right into it, but it's called Unraveled Roots, Exposing the Hidden Causes of Damaging Behavior. And that's available on Amazon. And I really encourage you to read it. We'll talk later about how you can, if you stay to the end, about how you can get it and even get a free copy. And I can relate to what you're talking about, Karin, as someone who had 3 abortions. And so after one, and it was so difficult, how did that happen a second time and a third time? I mean, this isn't who I thought I was, or um, in what I had intended for my life. So help us to dig in. We're gonna get right to the meat of the matter here. In the book, you talk about some specific um, like roots of the behavior. So can you give us a like an overview?
Sure. We highlight four root causes of unhealthy behavior. The first one in the book is abandonment. And, most of us immediately something comes to mind like a divorce in the family, right? A parent walks out of the relationship, or maybe a parent never walked in, right?
Mm,
And so, how do you feel about yourself when your father or your mother isn't present? It could be the death of a parent.
yeah,
Some examples that maybe are less likely for people to think about that might be watching. What if you were placed for adoption? How would that make you feel about yourself?
yeah,
You know what I mean? Sure, there's a family that wanted you and chose you, but there's also a family that abandoned you. And if your biological mother and father didn't want you, how could anybody ever want you?
mm,
So that's kind of abandonment. It could also be something less obvious, like emotional abandonment. A parent maybe that's a workaholic and doesn't give you the attention or the nurturing that you need as a child growing up. How would that make you feel about yourself?
yeah.
Would that make you feel unimportant, unloved?
Mm.
Is work more important? Why doesn't my mom want to spend time with me? Or why doesn't my dad want to spend time with me? So that's kind of like an overview of abandonment. And we dig into it deeper in the book.
Can
The
I can I add one to that?
Sure.
I was thinking about in my family, I was the youngest of four girls, and my oldest sister had a physical problem, and it really took all just so much out of my mom and dad caring for her. And
Yeah.
so, whether it's a brother or sister who has like an issue or a problem that your parents' attention is directed to them, and maybe understandably so, or it could be you have a sibling who's like the star athlete, and so the attention's going to them. And you can feel like unwanted, unimportant, unnecessary in the family. I think that's what you're talking about too, right?
Yes, and I'm so glad that you brought that forth because that was the situation in my family. I had two older brothers that were perfect,
Uh,
but I wasn't. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm so glad because right now I just kind of got in touch with that for myself. You
yeah.
know, and that's the thing about this is that when you start that journey to become emotionally more mature and living a whole full life, right?
Mhm.
Walking into your purpose for life, it's ongoing. It never ends. I've been doing this for a long time, and I still discover things about myself that I never thought of before. So thanks for drawing that out.
Yeah, yeah. So abandonment is one of the roots. What's another one?
Addiction.
Mm.
Again, we think of alcohol, drugs, tobacco. They're very common addictions. But Jane, I want to throw it out to you. Like, what are some of the new addictions that people have today? First thing that comes to my mind is social media,
Oh man, isn't that true? Wow.
right? We can spend our entire day on social media investing ourselves in the lives of other people rather than living our own.
Oh, for
And I'm
sure.
not, I'm not trying to say that social media is bad. I mean, I look at it myself, but it can become an addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think about some of the addictions, I've had to overcome alcohol as an addiction and smoking way back when, but I get addicted to shopping, especially online shopping, and that's related to, like you said, the social media stuff, and food. Those are addictions too that you can become consumed in that and really kind of lose sight of the children around you and the attention that they need. Am I
Yeah.
thinking about that right?
Yes, absolutely. I think of exercise. There's some people that spend hours exercising,
Yeah.
right? Or work.
Mhm.
There was a time that I think that I was addicted to my work, right? Because I just felt so good about myself when I would accomplish something major at work, right?
Mhm.
When we're doing something to alter our mood, that is an addiction. Now, not all of them are defined as addictions in like the DSM, which is the social work um, place where you go to diagnose things. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Have you heard of that, the DSM? So
Right.
not all of them are in them, but they can alter your mood if you do them to excess.
Yeah. So what is that? How does, if we grew up in a household where some of those addictions or any of those addictions were present, What kind of impact does that have? Does that have on us?
In general, I'm going to answer that in general. I think any addiction takes somebody away from you
Mm,
in some way, shape, or form. So
yeah,
when you don't get that attention
yeah,
that you want, and that you need as a child, you can start to believe lies about yourself.
yeah,
Here's my here's one of my parents off exercising for 3 or 4 hours a day. I'm sitting at home by myself. I have no one to talk to. My brothers are out doing their things, whatever. Like they must not love me.
mm,
My parents don't love me if they opt for exercise over spending time with me.
yeah.
What's wrong with me? There must be something wrong with me.
Hmm.
I'm never going to measure up. If my parents don't love me, nobody else is ever going to love me.
Yeah, and I think nobody ever said, but I wonder if my dad wasn't an alcoholic. Um, and in my family, that was what was used to calm you down. It was to have fun, but it was really to calm you down. And I think to some extent, when I went off to college, and I just like you, I wanted to be outgoing and party so people couldn't see how insecure I felt and how scared I was. I turned to alcohol because that's what I knew would just calm me down, make me feel better. And being under the influence certainly didn't help me when I was out partying and then ended up with a guy at the end of the night.
Right.
And that led to one, if not more, of my unplanned pregnancies. So
Yeah.
it kind of, there's a thread there, I guess,
Yes, there is. And it lowers our inhibitions, right?
for sure. So, okay, so we've got abandonment and addiction. What's a third root?
Abuse.
Oh,
And we talk about two really common: physical abuse, which is physical, emotional, verbal, kind of encompasses all of that kind of stuff. We have sexual abuse. If you're sexually abused as a child, it makes you feel all kinds of things about yourself. And then the one that we highlight in the book that isn't maybe as obvious is religious abuse. Did
okay.
you grow up in a religious home, Jane?
I think I did. I was raised Catholic, and yeah, I mean, we went to mass, and I think I did. Yeah.
So did you find any kinds of situations where you were forced to only be with Catholics or forced to go to church when you did? Can you see any religious abuse in your life?
Yeah, I don't know that I would go so far to say abuse, but here's what I do think had an influence is that it was so important to be a good girl and to not sin and to not, make mistakes that we didn't talk about grace. And I don't think I had a good concept of grace and forgiveness. So that when I got pregnant, for me, it was the like the horror of the terrible sin and being found out, and
Mm,
and I could never, have a baby out of wedlock type of thing. So I think it was, if it wasn't, I wouldn't call it abuse, but it was an imbalance or maybe an incomplete religious upbringing.
mhm.
That there is grace and forgiveness
Yeah,
if you mess up. You think
yeah.
that fits in there too?
Yeah, I think I mean anything that we experience as children, when we're children, we're really self-centered and we make everything be about us. And because we don't understand things, we typically make them mean something negative about us when we're kids, right?
Yeah.
Unless we have that positive influence from our parents saying you're doing great, thank you for just doing your best, you know what I mean, rather than holding us to a standard that we can't attain. So I think so. In the book, we talk about some more extreme types of religious abuse, having to do with the amount of money that you give to the church or how much time you spend at the church. And one example that we give is of a girl that's asked to collect money because she's pretty and collect money from people in a bar in order to be able to donate it to the church. And so those are kinds of some extremes that people have experienced. So that's one that most people have more difficulty connecting to, but for some, they know it right off the bat,
Yeah.
right?
So, abandonment, addiction, abuse, and then there's one more root that you talk about in the book that really, like, at first I said when I read the book, "Oh no, this doesn't apply to me." And then the more I read it, the more I realized, "Oh yeah, this is part of my roots too."
Yeah, this is my favorite one, codependency. I was a raging codependent. I want to actually read a couple excerpts from the book
Let's do
because
it,
they define it so well.
please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Codependency is when we become so enmeshed with someone else that we mold our behavior and opinions to fit what they seem to want or need, preventing us from discovering who we truly are and what we have to offer, independent of our performance or success at fixing or pleasing others.
Wow. Oh, wow.
You relate to that? Can you relate to that?
Yeah, I sure can. But I always think immediately the codependent is about alcohol, but it can be other things. Is that right?
It can. And I'm going to read you another excerpt from the book that talks about that victim and let me get it right, the victim and the taker.
Ah, yeah, that's good. That's a good part.
Yeah. But so this was me. What I just described was me in my marriage.
Mm,
Because um, my husband abused me, physically abused me, and I would do anything to try to change his mood
mm,
so that he wouldn't hurt me, right? There's a cycle of abuse where it builds up and then there's the explosion and then it starts the honeymoon period. Not to get off topic, but you can cut that out.
yeah,
um,
I think that's people will relate to that, Karen, for sure.
so I mean, you've heard the expression walking on thin ice, tiptoeing around kind of thing.
Yes.
That's how my life was. I
Mm,
could never predict how my husband was going to show up, where he was going to be in that phase. And I would adjust myself to try to make him feel differently, for his mood to change. I
mm,
would be very passive. I would be very overbearing. I tried everything, but it
mhm.
wasn't about me. It was about him.
Yeah.
And as a codependent, you can't control that,
Mm-mm.
right? We twist ourselves up into a knot trying to control someone else. And it's not possible. So let me read that other. Oh,
Yeah.
did you want to say something?
No, no, please do.
So, how we typically think about codependency is in that addict, non addict role, right?
Yep.
Okay. And so, what the book has to say is one person is the taker and plays the victim role, which
Mhm.
would be the addict, while the other person is the giver, willing to sacrifice their own well being in order to please the other person.
Mm.
Right. The victim is that person that blames everybody else for their situation, right? And the giver is the one who doesn't want that person to feel that way,
Yeah,
right? So
absolutely.
again, we're trying, in effect, what we actually end up doing is enabling that addict to continue in their addiction behavior,
Mhm.
rather than setting some boundaries and loving them well and not being codependent. We
Yeah.
can't fix other people.
No, and I think about, with some of my roots, I had good parents. They were decent people and they did their best to raise me. My dad, for whatever, his roots were, because he had some roots to deal with. And I think the book makes a really good point about that the roots just didn't begin with your parents. It probably goes back generations. But anyway, my dad was very distant and he worked a lot. And so I had definitely had that root of abandonment. And I mentioned, probably the alcoholism. The codependent part was like wanting to please him and wanting to make sure that he didn't have any stress or any pressure in his life. And so I think that was another factor. When I got pregnant, I didn't want my dad, either of my parents, but like thinking about my dad, I didn't want to upset him. And I didn't want to do anything to hurt him. And later on, the father of my third child, I'm sorry to say, was a married man. And when I found out I was pregnant, I remember saying to him, I'm pregnant. And interestingly, he was of the three fathers of my children, three different fathers. He was the only one I told I was pregnant before the abortion.
Mhm.
And so anyway, I said, I'm pregnant, but don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of it. And when I look back, I didn't even give him a chance. But I think about that's codependency, that just not wanting to upset him, gosh, his girl, married guy's girlfriend's pregnant, and to protect him. And that was a root way back that I look back and I think again, like, how did I get here? And it's helpful to understand how I got there.
So good, Jane. I mean, just so put those light bulbs going off. It's just so good. It's so healing. And it's not that we're reliving all the wrong that we did. I want to make that point, because at least I've come to terms with the choices that I made in life, and I cleaned up my side of the street and repented and asked for forgiveness and all that kind of stuff. So it's not about reliving all the bad. It's about understanding why we made the decisions that we made, because awareness is the first part in the change process. Unless we become aware of the triggers that drive us to do the things that we do and notice them, we can't change. So this is really all about becoming aware. And I really love too, Jane, thanks for saying this. This is not about blaming our parents. Our parents parented the way that they were taught to parent, right? And so, like you said, roots are generational. And I'll give you an example in my own family. We as parents, we tend to either model what was modeled for us, or we do the exact opposite.
Yes, that's good.
So my dad's dad was an alcoholic. My dad's brother was an alcoholic. And so my dad was the caretaker of his mom. He cleaned up all the messes that his dad and his brother did and all of the chaos that they threw my grandma into. And so when my dad became a parent, he went the opposite. He was a perfectionist. Right. So he wanted and everything about my dad was perfect. Right. But he had expectations for me that I couldn't attain. So again, I felt like I was a failure. And I learned very early on, it was much easier to quit than to fail. Let that sink in.
Yeah.
It was a lot easier for me to quit than it was to fail, because then when I failed, I disappointed my dad. When I quit, might have disappointed him, but only once. It wasn't ongoing disappointments, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm going to read something from the book, and it talks about how the goal. So, and I want our listeners to understand that we're here because we want you to heal from the abortion experiences you've had, and the guilt or shame, the pain, the regret, whatever it is, the anger that you might still be dealing with, because Karin and I are both survivors of abortion. And we know that you can heal and you can go on to live a beautiful, full life, as we're both doing. Even though our paths, really we had some bumps in the road. But you say in the book that the goal of this going back and looking at the roots is never to assign blame. That's not productive and does nothing to move you forward. This is what I thought was so key. The goal is to go back and look at what shaped you so you can learn from it, understand the why behind your choices, and start the forgiveness and healing process. And importantly, pass down a healthier legacy to your children. And I think that's just so important what you said, Karin.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as we're wrapping up, Karin, are there any more comments that you want to make? I hope you'll join me for some more videos about each of these roots in more detail, and how we can look at the roots, pull them up, and importantly, heal from them. Yes.
Well, there's a couple of things I want to say. For those that are watching that have had an abortion, if you've never told anybody, call us at Support After Abortion. We have a team of people that can relate to what you've gone through, and you really deserve to heal. I spent most of my life beating myself up for the decision that I made when I was 18. And I do love who I've become, but you have that opportunity too. This healing journey is ongoing. It's not a one and done. It's a lifetime, and it's a journey. It's not a destination, because we will never arrive. So I encourage you to start down the path, and you will be amazed when you look back over your shoulder that you don't even recognize the person that you once were, because you're becoming the person that you always wanted to be.
So, what are you learning about the answer to the question, how did I get here? Which of the following roots that Karin talked about are you connecting with? Abandonment, abuse, addiction, codependency, or a combination of all four? I promise to let you know how you can download a free copy of Unraveled Roots, so just go to the description and follow the link below. If you're ready to take another step in your healing after abortion, click on this video to go deeper and answer the question, so now what? Thank you for watching.